Now, welcome everyone. Now that I have unmuted myself, welcome to our very first week of our beer judge training. And I am actually in Charleston, South Carolina right now. I am doing a beer training tomorrow for our new location that we're opening. So when I say that I am all beer all the time, I am all beer all the time. So you may hear some people moving around. We're getting ready to open next week, and they're doing some later night things today. But they were kind enough to let me take advantage of their Wi-Fi that is much better than the Wi-Fi in my hotel. So I'm on a little bit of a different setup tonight than I normally am. But thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm super excited to get this kicked off tonight. I will today, if you all will indulge me for one more week, tonight we're going to go over the BJCP program. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is in just a moment, but beginning next week, we will go over how to assess beer, a little bit about our senses, how they work, a little bit about how to fill out score sheets. So next week is where we're going to really start to get into the meat of those foundations of how to taste beer. And then in week 3 is when we'll get started with beer styles week that we're going to be discussing. So please ask questions as we go through. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you are also able to ask questions. I have, everybody should have very good friends who do things like watch chats for questions, as I have tonight. So thank you, Nat and Asa, for helping me with that, and for also telling me that my sound is good. So with that, what I'm going to do first is just go over the Beer Judge Certification program itself. Then we're going to talk about the online entrance exam, and then we're going to talk about the tasting exam. And you'll see as we get in this, the reason why we're talking about all this is because the BJCP has a lot of positive things going for it. One of the big negative things it has is that it's not always easy to navigate the website, or it's not always intuitive to find the kind of information that you're looking for. Now, if you're able to join either one of our interest meetings, then you'll remember that I've said you certainly do not have to be a BJCP judge to be a beer judge. The same way when I talk to people about things like the Cicerone program, you can be an amazing beer professional without going through the Cicerone program, but what it does is provide that framework for how to structure your learning and then structure your knowledge into the most common areas. And the BJCP does that for beer judging. And it will also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more too, it also makes you more visible in terms of getting invites to things like judging in competitions. So I wanted to spend some time going over it tonight because ultimately the way this program originally started was going through the 14-week training to help you prepare to take the BJCP tasting exam. And we'll talk a little bit more about why in just a moment. But first, I'm going to pull up my screen and we're going to talk about just the BJCP. And sharing. All right, I feel like everyone can probably see this. So what we're going to do, and now my thing has decided not to work. So give me just a moment while I stop sharing and see what this is doing. All right, let's try this one more time. All right. Sorry, everyone, bear with me for just a moment while I figure out what setting I have put this on that is making it just beep at me. And So while I'm doing this, and I appreciate everybody's patience while I kind of muddle through this, it's always fun when you're trying to do something on like your other laptop, and it's just like, no, we're not, you're not able to do that. But for those of you who are in the BJCP, if you want to pop in the chat what your rank is, maybe something a little bit about why you decided to become a BJCP judge, I think that would be great for everyone to kind of hear. I'm going to try this again. All right, we'll just do it this way. So what I'm going to do first is talk just about the organization as a whole, and then we're going to go through the program and the exams. It's important to me to be very transparent and honest without coming across as a real bummer, but I do think it's important to talk about the benefits and the detriments of the BJCP program, because like I said, if you are going through this, if you decide that being part of the BJCP is not for you, I support that decision. There's definitely positives and negatives to being part of the program. And then we'll talk a little bit about some next steps. So I had to include this, as you all know, if you were able to attend any of the interest meetings, that I've created that resource page in the members area in part because the BJCP website is incredibly hard to navigate. And even as somebody who's on there quite often, I often have to go and find the information again for like the first time every time I go to the BJCP website. So again, we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. So when we're talking about this is the Beer Judge Certification Program. And what they do is what they say they want to do is encourage the advancement of education of people who are concerned with the evaluation of beer, mead, and cider. And I will say in this training course, we're only talking about beer. If you are interested in also getting your mead certification or your cider certification, definitely reach out and let me know. And I can put you in contact with some really great mead and cider judges who can help you do that. I don't know what the step below novice is when it comes to mead and cider, but that's where I am. I have had mead and I have had cider, and I like them both. And that's about the extent of my knowledge, but there are some really phenomenal mead and cider judges out there. If that's something that you're interested in, let me know and we'll get something going so you can get those resources as well. So the BJCP was created in 1985. Back then, there was an association called the Home Wine and Beer Trade Association, as well as the American Homebrewers Association. So 10 years after it was created, it actually became an independent organization, and it's been independent of the AHA since then. The AHA and the BJCP still work in partnership quite a bit, but the BJCP is an independent organization. They certify and rank beer judges through their exam and monitoring process. So that's what we'll be kind of prepping for over these next few weeks. So one thing that you are going to learn about the BJCP, if you decide to go through this program, is that they really love hierarchies. Everything is ranked. Even as a grader, when I took the grader training, I found out that I was like a level 1 junior grader or something. There's layers to everything. Everybody's ranked. So there's 6 official ranks within the BJCP. That is apprentice, recognized, certified, national, master, and grandmaster. So you attain each one of those levels through some kind of combination of experience points and exam scores. We'll talk about what both of those mean in just a moment. So when we're talking about exam scores, there are 3 exams within the BJCP that help determine your rank. The first one is the Online Entrance Exam. The second one is the Beer Judging Exam. And I will say that if I I tend to call it the tasting exam. So just know that if you hear me say tasting exam or beer judging exam, they're the same thing. For purposes of clarity, I will try to remember to call it the beer judging exam. Sometimes I'll just call it the tasting exam because that's what you're doing at that exam. And then you have the written proficiency exam. So within all of the BJCP, those are the only 3 exams that exist. There's also, you might see in some of the literature, there's a rank that's called provisional judge. That's somebody who has passed the online exam, took the tasting exam or the beer judging exam, and did not pass that. So they don't have a judge ID. And we'll talk about that judge ID, I think, in the next slide. So again, everybody's going to have a rank. So you all probably have some rank that I don't even know about that's called like thinking about being an apprentice provisional judge or something like that. But with the provisional judge, I don't want you to get too hung up on that, because what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is making sure that if you decide to take that beer judging exam, you're going to get recognized or certified. So don't get too hung up over the provisional judge because you are not going to fall into that category. So again, the hierarchy and the ranking and the experience points and everything within the BJCP is here for you just to help kind of with the visuals. So when you're determining your judge rank, is going to be determined by your tasting score and then your composite score. So your composite score is going to be the average of the tasting exam and the written exam. Now, I know several people who take the tasting exam and get high enough to get certified, and that's it, that they don't want to take the written exam. They don't, they're fine with just being a certified, or I shouldn't say just, they're fine with attaining the level of certified judge. That's totally fine. If you want to move up from certified judge to national, which is what I am currently, you have to take the written exam. So when you're taking the tasting exam, even if you got 100% on your tasting exam, the highest rank you would be able to attain is going to be certified. If you want to get to national or master, you need to take that written exam. The written exam also is outside of the scope of what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. If you are interested in taking the written exam, again, let me know. I have a ton of resources and some guidance for you to help you get ready for the written exam. But just know that it's out there. I'm really trying to get everyone across the finish line of the tasting exam. So with experience points, you can see if you, let's say you were able to schedule a tasting exam next week and you've passed the online exam and you go in and get a 65 on your tasting exam, then you will be a recognized judge. You don't need any kind of experience points to be a recognized level judge. For each level after that, there is some combination of experience points that you need, and we'll talk about experience points also. But those are going to be at least half of your experience points need to come from judging. And again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. So when as I was trying to put these slides together to concisely explain the structure of the BJCP, it immediately gets very complicated. So with experience points are earned mainly by participating in AHA and BJCP activities. And those experience points, for the most part, for most people, are going to come in the form of judging. There are, however, 2 types of experience points: judging points and non-judging points. So judging points you get when you actually judge in a registered BJCP competition, and that includes best of show judging. The amount of points you get per competition is largely is up to the competition organizer. Generally, if you're judging, let's say for an entire day, so you're judging a morning session and an afternoon session, you'll typically get 8 points for that. There is a maximum number of points you can get per competition, and off the top of my head, I don't remember what that is, but judging points are when you're actually judging. Now, And I believe I will also talk about this in just a moment. In case I don't, I will talk about it now so I don't forget. If you are judging now or before you take your tasting exam, just keep track of those of what you're judging. I don't recall how far back the BJCP goes, but once you get a judge ID, they will scan their records for your name and assign, retroactive judging points. I believe that is a year. If you judged 10 years ago, they're not going to go back and assign you judging points for judging 10 years ago. But if you judged, I believe I was judging before I took the tasting exam for the first time. And once I took the tasting exam and had my judge ID, I was awarded those points from, like the 6 months or so ahead of that I had been judging. But just keep a list of that. So that way, if once you get a judge ID, you don't see those experience points showing up on your record, you can, there's the BJCP lays out the steps for how to get those retroactive points. So just keep a list of it. And, for me, kind of a pro tip when I started judging, I would keep a list of, and I still have the list, I haven't updated it in a while, but I kept a list of just a Word doc, what competitions I was judging, and what styles I was judging. And if I found that I was getting, for whatever reason, I was getting assigned a lot of things like fruit beers or light beers or any kind of category, I guess, wouldn't give me the vapors or maybe clutch my purples or something. When I started kind of seeing I was getting assigned a lot of those, then I would just ask not to judge those categories. But I just kept that list so I could remember which styles I had judged and which styles I hadn't. So that is also helpful. If you're doing that from the beginning, then you've also got that good list of judging experience points. The non-judging points you can get in a lot of different ways. If you're stewarding or if you're helping in a competition, then you get non-judging experience points. If you administer or assist with a BJCP exam, you get points for that. And then if you participate in a continuing education program. So I know a lot of you just attended the Women's International Brewing Summit a few weeks ago. And with that came a free membership to the American Homebrewers Association. I really hope, just as an aside, that you take advantage of that free membership because the AHA has phenomenal resources, not just for homebrewers, but particularly anybody interested in learning more about beer. That free AHA membership, that's perfect. That's going to give you so many resources. But I say all that because you do need to be an AHA member to register for HomebrewCon, which is next month. But you do earn experience points for attending things like HomebrewCon. And just as a note, with the Women's International Brewing Summit, we're reaching out to the BJCP to see if that also counts as a continuing education program. Now, for purposes of this program, if you already have a BJCP ID, again, this is something that I have to shore up with the BJCP and make sure that I am understanding it correctly. But if you already have a judge ID, you should be able to get continuing education credits for taking this training. If you are brand new, unfortunately, they will not give you those experience points yet. That is something that I will be working on to hopefully make that a reality, that if you're doing something like this before you get to be a BJCP judge of some sort, you still get credit for putting in the effort. So judging, non-judging points, that's how you can earn experience points. And really, if you have a question about whether something would count as experience points, email them. On the website, I will find the actual link for it because it will take me time to find it. But I've done that before where I thought, wait a second, I did attend this or whatever, and they do have an email address that you can just email and say, hey, can you let me know about this? So next, we're going to move on to our exams. For each one of these, for the purposes of this discussion right now, we're just going to be very high level. In a few minutes, I'll go a little bit more into depth in both of these. But your very first step to becoming a BJCP judge is to take the online entrance examination. So this is 180 questions that you have to answer within 60 minutes. You can take it anytime. and it can be taken once a day until you pass. It's $10 US, or you can purchase 3 attempts for $20 US. So here is another pro tip for you. Purchase those 3 attempts and take it. Just take it once. And if you pass, great. Perfect. You're done. You don't have to do anything else. If you don't pass, you already have an idea of what the exam is like. You, kind of get a feel for what that time limitation is going to be like. You're going to know where you need to study the most, and you've got 2 more attempts to take it. When you purchase those 3 attempts, you have a year to use them. So my advice would be purchase it, take it, see how you do. You need to pass it prior to taking your beer judging exam. You need to take it prior to taking the actual exam, but not prior to registering that. So I know I've had a couple of people reach out about the, having a tasting exam near them later this summer or early in the fall. And I've said, yes, go for it. You can register for the beer judging exam without passing that online exam, but you do have to have passed the online exam before you actually show up for the tasting exam. So when you pass the online exam, you're past that first hurdle, but you don't have a BJCP membership. So when I'm talking about being a member of the BJCP, that means that you don't have a judge ID. You get your judge ID when you've taken the beer judging exam. So that's there I am being lazy again. No, I did it right, but just should have said, never mind. It's been driving. So you have passed the exam in normal times. You have a year between passing the exam. And so you have a year between passing the exam and taking the tasting exam. Normally, right now with the pandemic, they're really tolling everything. And so they just posted something the other day about that. They're continuing to do that. So if you have taken the taste or the online exam in the past year, and you're kind of getting nervous that you obviously haven't been able to take the tasting exam, don't be nervous, because everything is being told right now as far as the BJCP is concerned. I'm hopeful when they decide that that's kind of officially going to be over, that they will announce the official end date. But just know that in regular times, you have a year. Right now, they're not enforcing that 1-year limitation between the online exam and the beer judging exam. And then finally, the exams are given in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and simplified Chinese. So the beer judging exam, this is really kind of what we're training for. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in a few minutes, but this is an in-person exam. It consists of completing score sheets for 6 beers within 90 minutes. After you take your beer judging exam, this is when you have your BJCP judge number assigned to you. So like I mentioned, with the tasting exam, even if you got 100% on the tasting exam, the highest rank you're going to be able to achieve only taking the tasting exam is going to be certified. So once you take the beer judging exam, you will achieve either a recognized or a certified rank. So now that I've gone through all of that hierarchy and all of that confusion, let's talk a little bit about the benefits and the detriments of the program. And like I said, when I'm writing stuff like this and talking about things, I want to be as fair as I can, but I also want to be realistic with you. So again, this is why I say, if you decide that being a member of the BJCP is not for you, that is your decision to make. When we're talking about the benefits, though, there are a ton of benefits to being a beer judge, specifically to being a BJCP judge, because again, once you have your judge ID, then you start getting, invitations to judge at competitions near you. It's not impossible to be a beer judge, without those BJCP credentials, but nobody is putting your information in a nice, neat package and emailing it out to competition organizers. But beyond that, even if you decide not to do BJCP, keep judging beer, because judging is the absolute best way to improve your palate and your evaluation skills. Absolutely the best way. It is one of the biggest benefits of the BJCP, again, is giving you that framework and giving you those opportunities to judge. Keep judging. Every time I judge, I learn something new. I learn something new either about myself, about the beer, about my perception of it, about a new flavor, or I learn from my fellow judges. Judging, nothing tops it. Absolutely nothing tops it in terms of improving your palate and your evaluation skills, because what you're doing is getting in that zone and pulling apart the beer. And when you first start, a lot of it's probably going to taste like beer flavored beer, and that's okay. And we'll talk about that next week when we talk about tasting and evaluation. But as you go on, you will be shocked. It will happen sooner than you think that you'll be able to start picking up flavors and a lot of nuance, and be able to say like, hey, I think you used a little bit too much roasted malt in this recipe, or something like that. Judging is the best way to improve your skills, and your evaluation skills and your palate. I've repeated it like 10 times right now. That should tell you how important that it is. Do not underestimate it. The BJCP is far more affordable than the Cicerone certification program. I know I've had lots of conversations with people about, access to the brewing industry and who has that access. And, the BJCP isn't, if you're interested in an industry job, the Cicerone program is definitely going to help open a lot more doors for you than the BJCP will. But the BJCP, through their tasting exams, the competitions, it's far more affordable, and you're going to get a lot of, again, this big benefit I have here is the last bullet point, real world experience. You are going to be challenging yourself every time you judge to get just a little bit better. So if you're here to say, I'm interested in being a beer judge, I'm not doing the Cicerone certification program, I'm just here to learn how to be a beer judge, then the BJCP is going to be a far, far more affordable option for you than the Cicerone certification program. The other thing that I think is a huge benefit, it can also be a detriment, it can be very frustrating sometimes, is that advancement requires active participation and real world experience. And again, nothing beats that. But as we'll talk about in just a moment of some of the detriments, if you live someplace that's really rural, you might not have as many opportunities as somebody who, say, lives in Chicago or in San Diego, kind of bigger urban centers where there's a strong brewing industry and a strong BJCP presence. But that, I think that requiring that real world experience and requiring you to continue to actively participate in the program in order to advance is a huge benefit. It's absolutely huge. So when we're talking about the detriments, the BJCP, so when I said I try to be fair, this is why I try to really be fair to the BJCP. It's a completely volunteer-led organization. Nobody associated with the BJCP is getting any kind of a salary. It is all volunteers all the time. They have limited resources and they have limited experience. So I shouldn't say limited experience, but when we have, you'll see I have this note on here, there's a lack of testing best practices. There's not a certifying body that's making sure that the BJCP is structuring their questions in a clear way, or in a way that, again, is fair and unbiased. It's can sometimes, I will couch a lot of my program detriments in perceived and sometimes, because I don't know for sure, but I can tell you my experience and experience of others. If you don't, I don't know the best way to say, you don't know what you don't know. But it seems like there are a lot of people who say, yeah, I can write a multiple choice, no problem. And they don't really understand that there is skill and training involved in constructing good multiple choice questions. So when I say there's limited experience, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. There are very long wait times for exam results. When I say long, I mean at least 3 months. I took a tasting exam a month ago, and in maybe 2 to 3 months, I'll start looking for or maybe expecting my results. Again, it's all volunteers, and it's all volunteers who are humans, who have lives, who have full-time jobs, who have families. So, you know, those are just some of the detriments, the downside of being an all volunteer organization. There is a lot of perceived gatekeeping. Again, you'll notice I say perceived. I don't know that for sure. I do know what my experience has been. I know what the experience of other people have been. And that perceived gatekeeping, we'll discuss that in just a moment when we talk about some of these hurdles. There's a lack of accessible tasting exams. The BJCP currently, again, because it's entirely volunteer, limits the number of tasting exams that can be held each month to, I believe it's 10 locations, and that's worldwide. So that is, you know, not just 10 locations in a specific area or a specific country. That means at any given month, only 10 BJCP tasting exams will be taking place in the world. So there's a lack of accessible tasting exams, which is also why when you've attended the interest meetings, or if you've emailed me asking about a tasting exam that you see coming up in your area, that I'm like, email them right now, like stop what you're doing, email that administrator, get a seat right now. That's why, because they don't happen very often, and there's usually a lack of available seats. So for each one of those 10 tasting exams, the total number of people who can take that exam are 12. You can only have 12 people. If you, for some reason, if you have a larger group, you can petition the BJCP for more. But generally, at any given time in the world, in any 1 month, 120 people can take a tasting exam. And then, like I mentioned, depending on the location, there's a lack of opportunity to gain your necessary judging points or experience points. So if you all were able to attend the Beer Judging 101 that I did with Loy at the Women's International Brewing Summit, you might recall that she mentioned that that's been a hurdle for her. She's in Montana. It's beautiful up there, and there's a lot of really great beer, but there's not a lot of opportunities to do BJCP homebrew competitions or get those experience points. So depending on where you live, you may have that lack of opportunity to gain some of those necessary judging points, which doesn't mean that they don't exist. It just means that it's going to take you a little bit longer, or if you're able to, you may want to travel. I've traveled before to get judging points. I've also traveled before to take tasting exams. So some of these hurdles, again, I think it's important to just be upfront about it as we're talking through this, but that monthly allowance is small, and they often fill up months in advance. And the other part of tasting exams is it involves logistics, such as inviting proctors, getting proctor approval from the BJCP. So currently I'm waiting on approval for 2 tasting exams that I requested over a month ago to be scheduled that have not been scheduled yet. But you need to find, your proctors have to be national level or above. And currently I think there's about 800 national level judges worldwide. They all have to be national or above. You have to have at least 2. So, you have to, it's like this very like trying to fit together all of these pieces to be able to get a tasting site exam scheduled. Then you have to wait for the BJCP to give you proctor approval. I don't know how long that takes. I can tell you it takes longer than 5 weeks, because that's how long I've been waiting. You have to find a site. You have to prepare and pour samples. So there are a lot of logistics involved in getting testing sites scheduled. The number of seats available per exam, like I said, is typically limited to 12. And who gets a seat is up to the exam administrator. If we ever have a couple of beers together, you can ask me what my experience has been with that and how I was able to get seats for tasting exams. It's pretty infuriating, but that's not every time, and that's not everybody's experience. But the administrators often organize their tasting exams for their homebrew clubs, for their communities, for their friends, and they are sometimes hesitant to allow others a seat. So what that means is, if you see an area near you that's having a tasting exam, and again, that's Another reason why anybody who's asked, like, hey, I see this one, should I go ahead and sign up? Yes, go. Email now. Keep emailing them until they give you an answer. That's another reason why, because sometimes, I've had people honestly say, hey, I already have 12 people signed up, or I'm doing a training course and I have 12 friends who say they're going to do it, and I don't want to take a seat away from them. Technically, the exam administrators are supposed to give a seat to whoever wants a seat. There is no policing involved in that or oversight. So that communication can be difficult for a multitude of reasons, and the BJCP does not facilitate that communication. So let's say that I'm able to have my tasting exam scheduled in Atlanta in October, which hopefully will happen. You all will be the first to know. But somebody is emailing me and not hearing anything back about getting a seat. If they email the BJCP is going to say, that's not really our problem. There's nothing we can do. Now, they may email me and say, hey, you need to email this person back. But largely, they opt out of facilitating any kind of communication between potential test takers and exam administrators. So now that I've told you about some of the hurdles, let's talk about what we're doing to overcome those hurdles. So we're scheduling online or on-site tasting exams in as many locations as we can. So as I mentioned before, going from me thinking that maybe 40 people would sign up to over 600 around the world. This has presented a little bit more of an obstacle than I was originally anticipating, which does not mean that it won't happen. You will remember from interest meetings and also from the email that I sent out last week. If you head over to the members area of the website under the Gentleness.beer on the events page, I have listed all of the tasting exams that are currently on the schedule through the end of the year. So if you haven't looked yet, I would go look and see if there's one near you. And if there is, sign up. Email the administrator, ask if they have a seat available, and sign up for it. As we're, kind of getting everything's kind of gelling together, then I will work with potential exam administrators within the different regions to see what we can get scheduled. I'm planning to administer at least 2 exams in the Southeast. One will be in Charlotte, one will be in Atlanta. Again, as soon as I have that approval and I know that I'm good to go, I've got my proctors lined up. I actually, for Atlanta, am hopeful that the highest ranking judge, who happens to be a woman, her name is Sandy Cockerham, she actually offered to drive from Indianapolis down to Atlanta to be a proctor for that tasting exam. So I'm super excited about that. And hopefully sometime over the next 14 weeks, I'll be able to have Sandy on and you all will be able to meet her and pick her brain about some things. But I will be administering exams in the Southeast. Now, I'm not just going to be administering them in like those 2 times. I will continue to administer the exams as I can get them scheduled in the Southeast, for as long as it takes for everyone who's watching this right now to get the BJCP rank that they want. But that's one of the hurdles that I'm working on overcoming. Again, you guys will receive communications about upcoming exams. I will make sure that once my exams are approved that they have been approved, and make sure that I am available to communicate with you about the available seats. And one other thing, starting tomorrow, it just so happens that the board seat for the South Regional Representative for the BJCP is up for election this year. And your pal Jen is running for that board seat. So if you have BJCP friends who are in the Southern region, encourage them to vote for me, please. That would be amazing. And, if you don't want me to run for a seat on your board, all you have to do is answer my emails, and then I won't decide that maybe I should be on your board of directors to help facilitate communication a little bit better. And when I say the South, the BJCP has a really weird, for lack of better word, interpretation of the South. So it includes Oklahoma, it includes Texas. For some reason, it doesn't include Tennessee. Is like, if you're going to be weird about what the South is, just go for it. But you can go to the BJCP website and find what states are involved in the South. And if you have friends, if you are a BJCP judge and you're in the South, then I would love to have your vote, because one of the things that I'm doing to overcome some of these hurdles is finding out how we can streamline these processes from the inside and what I can do. I'm not really content to just, complain or wish that things were better. Obviously, we're all here right now because I really like to take action and do something about it. So that is the end of this one. And I'm going to, as I'm pulling up this other one, I'm going to take a second and look through the Q&A here. Okay, so does the comp have to be BJCP sanctioned in order to get points? Yes, it does. On the BJCP website, you can see the competition calendar. I am working on getting those competitions, those sanctioned competitions, onto our events calendar in the members area of the website. So that way you'll be able to see those coming up. But if you are interested in getting, looking to see what opportunities are near you that are coming up, go to that exam calendar. I've also encouraged people to find the homebrew clubs in your area and, like their page or join their group on Facebook. And most homebrew competitions, if they are, for a lot of homebrew clubs, and I know this personally from my own homebrew clubs, the competitions are a revenue generator for the clubs, but really to be a revenue generator, they need to be BJCP sanctioned. So it's kind of rare that you would see a club competition any size beyond just kind of an informal club competition that isn't going to be BJCP sanctioned. The other note I will put on that as well, a lot of professional competitions will also be BJCP sanctioned. I know, for instance, in Charlotte for the past few years, there's been the Beer Army Beer Wars. That is a commercial competition. So when I say commercial, it means that professional breweries are entering their beers into a competition and they follow the BJCP guidelines. It's the BJCP sanctioned competition. Let's see. So do you get experience points for judging in competitions before passing any exams, or do you have to pass the exams first? I think I covered this, but just to make sure that I did, you can get your experience points before you've passed an exam. And like I said, I think they might go back a year. That should be fairly easy now as competitions are kind of starting to get going again. I would just keep track of all of the competitions that you've judged in, just to make sure that once you do get that BJCP ID, that they show up in your record. And if you need assistance, once you do have your judge ID, I can definitely point you to the area on the website that tells you like the process you go through in terms of contacting the BJCP or the competition organizer to make sure that you get your points. So I would say starting today, or for like the past couple of months, if you've been judging, make a list, and then I'll figure out precisely what that timeline is. Are there experience points for being part of a sensory panel at a brewery? Melanie, that is a really good question, and I am not sure. So I will find out. I'm going to make a note of that, and I will find out about that. I'm not sure. I do know when you're judging in BJCP competitions, there is an area on there for like non-BJCP experience to check that you've had sensory training. So yeah, I'm not sure. We will find out. How long do you have to use all 3 exam attempts? In normal times, you have a year for all 3 exam attempts. I believe that hasn't changed since it is online and you can do it anytime. That you have a year to do all 3 attempts. Can you sign up for a seat in a nearby city and then give up your seat if the exam pops up in your hometown? Yes, and I actually have I recommended that to somebody the other day who has one. There's one fairly close to her, but if I'm able to have my exams approved, then it's really close to her. And so I said, you may want to email the organizer and see how many seats there are that are open, And, then as soon as you have one that's closer to you, go ahead and just let that exam administrator know that you won't be taking that exam. And truthfully, in my experience, exam administrators expect people to drop out, particularly at the last moment. So yeah, if there's a seat in your nearby city, sign up. And then if you can get a seat closer, sign up for that and just let the other person know. The tasting exam is closed book. Does that mean you will not have a style guide? Yes, that does mean that you will not have a style guide for the tasting exam. And I'm actually going to jump into the online exam and tasting exam information now. So our points for continued education and things like being a steward, do they have the same time limit as if you were judging to be awarded? Yes, I believe so. And I think, again, they typically toll them at a year, like you have to do something with the BJCP every year to stay active. But right now that's being told for those requirements. But yes, I believe that they do have the same time limit. Any accommodations for people that need extra time or need questions answered? For the online exam, I don't believe so. But for the tasting exam, I would talk to the exam administrator about that. I'm not sure what the AHA statement is for, or what their policy is with the BJCP. So I'm not sure, but I can definitely find out for that as well. I can't imagine that they won't have a policy in place for that. So the online entrance exam right now and then continue. Yes, take the online entrance exam as soon as you want to. If you want to purchase all 3 attempts when we're here today and take it tonight and you pass, great, you're done. You just need to get ready for your tasting exam. I would encourage you to take it as soon as you feel like you are ready to take it. I kind of prefer the Band-Aid method for stuff like that, as I read through the guidelines a couple of times, and we'll talk about the online exam in just a second. But yeah, I would take the online entrance exam sooner rather than later. And I think it's also great to have, just to go through it and see what the questions are like. So if in the event you don't pass, you still have all of that, like what the questions are like and what you need to study. Clarify what level of beer judge training do you need to have to host an exam? So to host an exam, you have to be a national judge or higher. So really for anything within the BJCP to be able to give back to the organization, you need to be national or higher. So I will come back to the Q&A, but I'm going to hop into my next slides, which I don't have pulled up because I had to fight with PowerPoint. So give me just a moment to get that ready to go. And I promise I have used Zoom and PowerPoint before. I guess my work computer is just like, nah, this computer is for work. This isn't for doing after work things. All right, so now we're going to talk about this online entrance exam. And again, it's being kind of a jerk to me. So my apologies, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to get rid of this. And I think I've got it again. All right, so with this, now we've just talked about this part. This is the very first step to becoming a BJCP ranked beer judge. I'm not going to go over these again because we just talked about it in our last few slides. So the outcomes, what you get when you take the online entrance exam. That means that you're able to sign up for the beer judging exam. you will also get a certificate of completion. So that certificate of completion is what you'll need to bring with you to your beer judging exam, just to show that you've passed that first hurdle in becoming a beer judge. What you don't get, you do not get a BJCP rank, and you do not get a BJCP judge ID. So your judge ID is what's used to track your scores and also your experience points. You get those things when you take the tasting exam. So when we're talking about the exam format, it's designed to test your knowledge of beer styles, beer characteristics, and brewing process. But it's really, really, really heavy on beer styles. You have 180 questions that have to be answered within 60 minutes. That means roughly 20 seconds per question. But if you've taken the certified beer server exam, what another thing the BJCP does that I like a lot better is that you are able to skip questions and return to them. And if I remember correctly from the online exam, when you skip a question, there's actually a little box up in the right-hand corner that will show like a checkbox if you've answered a question, and then it shows a little flag if you haven't. So let's say that you get to the very end of that 180, instead of trying to scroll up and see what questions you need to answer, you can just go click on that flag and it takes you right to the question. So don't be too intimidated by that 20 seconds per question. That's just the average. You know, some questions are going to take you 5 seconds. Some are going to take you 45 seconds. It will all average out, but just remember that you are able to skip questions and then come back to them. It's going to be a mixture of multiple choice, of true, false, and of multiple answer. So with the online exam, technically it is open book. You can have your guidelines there with you, but open book exam, if you don't know the material, having the notes and resources nearby won't help you, because you have 60 minutes to answer 180 questions. So you really need to know, 70, 80, hopefully more, but be able to go through and just answer like, I know this, I know this, I know this, I will flag this, this, and this. And when I get done at the end and have some time left, I can, flip through my guidelines and find easily what I'm looking for. So it is open book. You can have your guidelines, it's an online exam, but they have also structured it such that if you're thinking you're going to sit down and try to Google the answers to everything, you're not going to get that accomplished. You simply can't do that with 180 questions in 60 minutes. So recommended resources, and this I have, this is kind of a short little slides of these, but the things to look for in terms of what you're going to study from to prepare for the exam are going to be your style guidelines, the beer exam study guide, and the BJCP judge procedures manual. All of these are available on that resources page in our members area. So if you haven't signed up for the members area yet, under the Ginfluence.beer, you can sign up. And then once you're in that members area, you will see there's a resources page. All of these things are there available for you. Hopefully all of you have already downloaded your BJCP style guidelines on your phone. Hopefully you've gotten a hard copy of it. But really, if you read through these, and again, if you would like to wait until we've gone through all of the weeks of training before you take your online exam, that's totally fine. Take the online exam whenever you're comfortable with doing it. But I think that there's also a danger in kind of over preparing for it. So again, that's why I suggest get those 3 attempts for $20 and just take it once to see what it's like. And then as you're reading through these resources, you can kind of structure your mind around what those questions are going to look like. So that is all I have for the online entrance exam. And I'm going to switch over to our tasting exam. Now, with this tasting exam, one thing I will say about it is that I have a lot of information on here. I won't go through it all in depth. Know that we're going through this information first. I think that it's helpful to understand what you're being graded on. So again, as you are studying as you're practicing filling out your score sheets, you can keep this information in the back of your head about what you're being graded on. Then what we're also going to do, you'll see these slides now. You're going to see this exact same overview again at the end of our training as you're prepping to actually take the tasting exam. We're going to go through this again when everything will make a little bit more sense. So just understand that I have the information here for you now to help you. You know, when I took the beer judging exam a couple of times before I found this information. And after I found this information, it was the difference between me being a certified judge and me being a national judge. I think my tasting exam score went up by like 15 points. So I want to go over it at the beginning, not to overwhelm you, but just so you understand what you're being graded on, and then understand as we go back to actually prepare for the tasting exam. We'll go through this again. So it's just kind of as you're walking in, you can keep everything in perspective and understand, you know, where you're able to get, like, maximize the amount of points that you can. And so I feel like this one is going to also be kind of a jerk to me, but we'll try it. Aha, that's the issue. And hopefully for the rest of our sessions, I won't be like literally rolling into an unfamiliar city and an unfamiliar building with like 30 minutes before the session starts. So once I'm like back in the comfort of my own home, then I will definitely be able to transition between all these slides a little bit easier. So talking about the beer judging exam, this consists of 6 beers in 90 minutes, which means you have roughly 15 minutes per beer per score sheet. It goes fast. It goes really fast. Like I mentioned, I took a tasting exam a month ago, and even though I had all of these, I've taken the beer judging exam before. Every time I take it, at the end, the tasting exam and also the written exam is 90 minutes with 5 essay questions. You get finished and you're like, damn, that was really fast. And also my hand super hurts. So it goes quickly, which is why you will remember in the interest sessions, I had said, you know, start practicing filling out score sheets, work up to being able to complete a score sheet within 15 minutes. You don't have to do that right now. You know, I would still, as you're filling out a score sheet, maybe set a timer for 15 minutes to get a sense of what that feels like. But, you know, I would start out maybe giving yourself 20 minutes or so to fill out a score sheet, but definitely when you're practicing filling out your score sheets, don't let it be a leisurely thing. Really get yourself in the zone and get to where you can fill out a score sheet in 15 minutes. So with the tasting exam, you are told what the style is. So, you know, your administrator will come out and say, this is an American lager. Then your job is to evaluate that sample in front of you and decide, is this a good representation of an American lager? If it's not, why isn't it? If it is, why is it? So you evaluate the beer by completing the score sheet. Does the sample in front of you fit the stated category? Why or why not? That's the whole point of the tasting exam. Is to, you know, you've got, say, an American lager and it comes out and it's dark brown. Already, you know, like, hey, American lager is not supposed to be dark brown. So, you know, your appearance points, you get 0 out of 3. So that's what the exam is like. You are told what the style is. It's up to you to decide where the beer in front of you fits within that style. Your BJCP rank is going to be determined by your tasting exam score, your initial BJCP rank. If you get less than 60, nobody here is going to get less than 60. We will go through that a little bit more here, but I almost want to just tell you to ignore the fact that there's a possibility to be an apprentice. But your BJCP rank will be determined by your tasting score. So if you get somewhere between a 60 and a 69, you will be a recognized judge. If you get somewhere between 70 and 79, you will be a certified judge. Again, if you go above 79 on your tasting exam, you're still a certified judge. Going back to the hierarchy and how all of that is structured. So if you choose to advance beyond certified, your tasting exam score will be averaged with your written exam score. They'll always take your highest score no matter what. And it's just average, straight, just a straight average. So you can retake the tasting exam as often as you like. And we'll talk in just a moment about the only caveat to that is that you need to, you have to have your results from your tasting exam before you are able to sit for another exam. And that's true of your tasting exam and your written exam. So in theory, if you were able to, say, schedule a tasting exam and then the next week you had a written exam, they would throw your written exam out. They wouldn't score it. You have to have all of your outstanding exams. You have to have those scores before you can take another exam, which is another detriment in terms of advancing in rank. I put this in here because I was very confused about who does what, because being in school, proctor, I always thought the proctor was what the BJCP calls the administrator. So I just put this in here because, again, they really like their titles and they don't always make very intuitive sense. But at the exam, besides the exam takers, you will see the administrator and the proctor. So if my exams are approved for the Southeast, I will be the exam administrator. So what I do is schedule the exam in the site logistics. I prepare the beers for the exam. I collect the payments. I administer the exam, and then I send those exams to the BJCP and a few other things after, like logistics afterwards. The exam proctors, basically what they're going to do is show up and take the exam with you. There's going to be at least 2 proctors. There won't be more than 3. They're going to be national judges or above. They prefer at least 1 master judge. So I know for both of my exams, I have masters and grandmasters for both locations. So what they're going to do is they take the exam with you and they independently complete score sheets. Once the exam is complete, the proctors discuss the beers with each other and their accompanying score sheets to arrive at what's called the consensus score. So the consensus score is what, let's say one of the proctors gave a beer of 40, the other one gave it a 43. So maybe they decide that beer, that score is going to be a 41. That's a consensus score. This is it. It does start to get very complicated. So just know these slides are here later for you to come back and look at. You don't have to get too caught up in it. But again, once I understood really how all of the scoring worked, it really, really helped with my getting my score improved. So the consensus score is not necessarily reflective of the sample. It's a consensus. To address situations where the proctor's consensus scores are not reflective of the examinee's scores, the BJCP will adjust the score. When the consensus score is inconsistent with the average exam and it's inconsistent with the beer description supplied by the exam administrator. So what's happened to me on one of my tasting exams is we had a foreign export stout. It was Guinness, which is the commercial example for foreign extra stout. And one of the proctors, and this next bullet point is taken not just from this one exam, but in part from this one exam. Sometimes a proctor can dominate the conversation and dictate a consensus score that closely matches their own. So that's the story I'm telling you right now. It was the commercial example of that beer style. And this proctor gave it like a 20. And the other proctor gave it, a 40. The beer wasn't flawed. It was within the style because it's the definition of the style. But this other proctor went into this whole, the style isn't like that anymore. It's changed and blah, 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 blah. So the consensus score that they gave it ended up being something like a 30. That doesn't reflect the fact that it was a commercial example and it wasn't flawed in any way. So in situations like that, the BJCP does have these redundancies built in to where they can correct for that. So if the average score of the exam participants is 40 and the consensus score is 20, the BJCP will adjust for that. Those are just some caveats to keep in mind. I've taken other tasting exams where it's been evident that the main proctor has dictated to the other proctors what he thought that the beer should be, what that consensus score should be. It's, everybody's human and does human things that can sometimes be infuriating when your grade depends on it. So those are just some considerations and caveats. What I'm going to do next is go through how the grading works. Again, I'm not going to go way in depth on this because it starts to get very confusing, and I don't want to overwhelm you with how the real nitty gritty of how everything is graded, but I do want you to remember that this information is here. So you have 5 components on the tasting exam that you're graded on. That's your scoring accuracy, your perception, your descriptive ability, completeness in communications, and feedback. Each section is worth a maximum of 20 points for a total of 100 points possible per score sheet. The scoring accuracy and the perceptions compare your score sheets to the proctor score sheets. And we'll talk about each one of these in detail in just a moment. The descriptive ability, the completeness in communications, and the feedback are independent of the proctor score sheets and evaluate your individual abilities. So I've also done this on a tasting exam before where I completely missed something that was it was a very obvious flaw in the beer, and I completely missed it and picked out something else, but I described that something else and I described the cause accurately, and I gave accurate feedback on here's how you correct for this. So that, that descriptive ability and feedback is independent of whether or not you're correct group. So when we're talking about the score sheets, and again, these examples of these are available in the members area. When you go to a BJCP competition, you're going to see what's on the left, the BJCP competition score sheet. And we'll go over the score sheets next week on how to fill them out. Just know that there's a difference because I didn't. And so the first time I took the tasting exam, I was a little surprised to see the BJCP exam score sheet rather than what I was used to seeing. So with the exam score sheet, you have all of those off flavors, or I guess they're descriptor definitions, because off flavors, not, what's considered an off flavor in one style of beer isn't necessarily an off flavor in another. But with your examination version, it doesn't tell you what is wrong. So with something like acetaldehyde, you just check there's acetaldehyde, and then it's up to you on the feedback, on the flavor, wherever, it's up to you to say, I get green apple, latex paint, fresh pumpkin, this is acetaldehyde, this may be what caused it, this is how you can fix it. So just know that there's a difference in the score sheets. As you're practicing filling out score sheets, I would use the competition one until you feel confident in what your descriptor definitions are going to be. And honestly, just keep using the BJCP competition one as you're filling it out, and just know when you go into the exam that you won't have the definitions on there, you will only have the descriptors. So when we're talking about the scoring accuracy, what this means is this is the absolute difference between your scores and the proctor scores. So I remember this was also a nice feather in my cap on one of my tasting exams at the end. They used to go through and tell you what their consensus scores were for each beer. Apparently they don't do that anymore, which is a transparency problem. But I had a couple of beers where it was I gave it a 34 and the consensus score was 34. And that's awesome because I got full points for that. I got 20 points per beer. So again, I will try not to go too deep into the weeds here, but when we're looking at that variance from what the consensus score is, you can't get fewer than 9 points. So you're going to get at least 9 points for your scoring accuracy. If you gave it a 45 and the judges gave it a 13, you're still going to get 9 points for that. That's also why, and we'll talk about the completeness in a moment, but that's also why it's really important to make sure that you have your overall score filled out on your score sheet. So this I'm going to skip over, just know that it's in here if you want to figure out exactly see an example of how that's going to work out. When it comes to perceptive ability, this is going to be what's the most difficult to evaluate for your graders to evaluate. And even having gone through grader training, it's still very confusing to me precisely how they want you to do this. But basically, it's kind of holistically looking at what the main descriptions were from the proctors. From the guidelines, if the administrator did anything, like doctored the beer in any way, they'll take that information into account. And then also the score sheet. So it's kind of this big holistic glob that you try to bucket these different descriptors into. So what they're essentially doing is, did you perceive the same characteristics as not only the proctors, but also the rest of the examinees? I have also had this happen to me where they actually deducted points because I said that there was acetaldehyde in a beer and no one else did. I on principle, technically there's acetaldehyde present in every single finished beer, no matter what. So just because nobody else perceived it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. I need to stop getting upset about this acetaldehyde thing, but just know that you are being evaluated not just on what the proctors say, but also what the examinees say. And, this is one of those areas where you can maximize the amount of points you get for being familiar with the styles, which is what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks, is getting familiar with these styles and write as many descriptors as you can. So maybe I would say low malt backbone of flour and water cracker supports moderate hop bitterness. Make sure to also note, so the absence of a perception is still a perception. So, if you get an American Pale Ale is the example I have here, if you don't get a lot of grapefruit American hop aroma, right, it's low. That's low for the style. So it's, that's really where you're going to pick up a lot of points, is your ability, particularly if you've been practicing writing your score sheets within 15 minutes, getting as many descriptors as you possibly can. And, as if it's as minor of a thing you can pick up on as possible. And this perceptive ability and the descriptive language is where we're going to be really focusing our time as we're talking through the beer styles over the next few weeks. With the perception rubric, I'm not going to go terribly deep into this, but just, again, know that this information is in here on kind of how they grade, go through and make that list of, okay, if we said that it was American Pale Ale, they're going to expect you to talk about the hops. They're going to expect it to be American hops. These are the things that you would expect somebody to say about an American Pale Ale. And did you say those things? So your descriptive ability. The two things to remember, this is what we'll be practicing in not only filling out score sheets, but also as we go through each one of the styles each week. The main two factors is your ability to describe what kind and how much. So really, as you're learning to taste beer, I think the first step is learning that what kind. What kind of flavor are you tasting? What kind of aroma are you smelling? And then as you get more experience, you're able to say how much. I know that was something that was challenging for me to understand when I was first judging, is how do I know if it's moderate bitterness compared to if it's high bitterness? And just trust that process, that will come to you. Just always keep in mind, starting now as you're describing beer, what kind, how much. do that for every descriptor that you write down. So the descriptive ability is going to be measuring your competency in using adjectives and evocative phrases. We will talk more about descriptive language next week. So don't worry about that. But largely when we're talking about adjectives and evocative phrases, it needs to be specific without being too specific, and it needs to be understandable without being too vague. We'll cover that starting next week. And then of course, each week as we talk about the beer styles, we'll talk about what those evocative phrases and adjectives would be for each style. And what you're doing with that descriptive ability is how well the perceived characteristics, so what you're getting when you're evaluating the beer, how well they match with those BJCP guidelines for the style. And that's going to help you determine the stylistic accuracy and technical merit. So going back to what I was saying with the American lager, if it's dark brown, that's, stylistically, that's not accurate. Technically, something went very, very wrong. And so that indicates, that that technical merit is actually more like a technical demerit. So I've put this in here for you just to give you an example when we're talking about descriptive ability. I think it's also really helpful to see that this isn't impossible to do. So if you go into your tasting exam and you say you have a hoppy aroma, that's going to be an apprentice level. Again, and I will talk about this next week also when we're talking about descriptive ability. If the level you're at right now is malty and hoppy, that's fine. That is a perfectly good place to start. Know that we're going to improve that very much, because something like hoppy aroma doesn't actually communicate very much. So let's say that it's American hop aroma. Then you're going to be in the recognized range. Moderate, right? So around certified, so where we see that intensity, that's the difference, the what kind and how much. That how much part is the difference between recognized and certified. Moderate American hop aroma for something like national level, moderate citrusy American hop aroma. And then something like master would be moderate citrusy American hop aroma with notes of and pineapple. And those are, as we'll learn, if you're not familiar with things like American hops, don't worry about it. You'll be familiar with it when we're finished at the end of these next few weeks. But that is a very, that is a classic American hop aroma. And so just learning what that language is and how to slot the what kind and how much with different styles is what's going to make the difference between something like a recognized BJCP judge and a certified BJCP judge. So again, this is, don't get too very caught up in this. Know that it's here. When I was taking the exam, since I am going for a master level, I did keep in mind that for aroma, I needed to have at least 6 descriptive adjectives or phrases. I needed to have at least 4 for the intensity. Again, that's going back to that moderate American citrus hop aroma with pine and grapefruit. That's 5 right there. I think I didn't do a very good job of counting, but I did that for master level. You don't need to do that when you're going in to take it the first time, but understand that that's where the points are coming from in terms of your overall grade. So with feedback, this is going to measure your ability to be able to provide that useful and constructive feedback by explaining how to adjust your recipe or the brewing procedure to produce a beer that is closer to the style. So your feedback, again, this part is going to be independent of what the consensus score is, what other judges had to say about it. This is going to be consistent with your descriptive ability and the way you scored it. So in general, you should be able to provide one suggestion for improvement for each scoring level below outstanding. So this will make more sense when we're looking at a BJCP score sheet, but generally there are 6 categories of how you're going to rate a beer. It's going to be outstanding. If you have an outstanding beer, this is, you won't have an outstanding beer on your tasting exam. In my years of judging, I think have maybe given an outstanding score to less than 5 beers. I can really only think of like 2 beers right now that I've done that for. Outstanding scores are very, very, very rare. But if you do give a score of 45 to 50, it's perfect. There's not really anything you can do. It is the best version of that beer that you have ever tasted. 50 points. You don't have to change a thing. It's perfect. That's not going to happen. So excellent is going to be, and that's actually a typo. So excellent is 38 to 45. So you should have at least one suggestion for improvement. It's not the best beer you've ever tasted. Why not? And, you know, a lot of times when I'm judging, if a beer's falling within that range, I'll say, hey, you know, your recipe seems super solid. Maybe the bitterness is just a tad too high for this style, or, you know, your roasted malt tastes a little old or something like that. You just want to be able to give them, what is that suggestion to make it to that outstanding level? Very good. Really, that's where the majority of your beers are going to fall. You want to give at least 2 suggestions for improvement: good, fair, problematic. One thing with problematic, to be able to, I don't have to agree with everything the BJCP does, but for judging purposes, just remember the lowest score you should ever give a beer is a 13. That's what the BJCP decided. I don't make the rules. I don't agree with that. But just know for your tasting exam, if you have a really problematic beer, the lowest score you're going to give it is a 13. So again, feedback, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Completeness and communication. This is one of those areas, I think this is arguably the area that is the easiest place to get the maximum amount of points. This is just bookkeeping kinds of details. So that is things like correctly writing or marking what the beer style is. What is the beer or the entry number? Did you write your name and number on the score sheet? Are there scores for each section for the overall score? So remember, going back to that consensus score at the very beginning, if you know, you need to have a score in each one of those subsections and then an overall score. Do you have that? Do you check boxes in the scoring guide, the accuracy part, and the descriptor definitions? That is really all there is to the completeness and communication. There's a little bit more. I have this on here. Again, we won't go through all of it. There are some really silly things that you can get points for. So one thing that the BJCP does, again, that I do think is good, is they very much encourage you to be positive. You should be saying at least one nice thing about the beer. You should comment on the drinking pleasure associated with the entry. That is 1 point. All you have to do is say, I really liked this beer, or I did not really like this beer. You get a point for that. You get a point for those suggestions. You get points for whether you were efficient in your use of vertical space. So that means that there are fewer than 2 blank lines on your score sheet. That's all that means. You get points for that. You get points for making sure that you have, you know, generally, if you have addressed everything on the score sheet that you're supposed to, you won't have, that 2 blank lines isn't a big deal. So that's kind of an additional check on, are you actually addressing each one of those components the way that, you know, you should be for a really good score sheet. But you get points for making sure that there's not blank lines. Numerical values are applied for all the component scores and also for your total score. So again, you just have all of your scores filled in. You have those boxes checked. You wrote correctly. It's well organized. It's legible. Print. Don't use cursive. Print. When I write in cursive, so the printing part is a little bit of a challenge for me to remember to do that. You get points for that if you write neatly. And then efficient use of horizontal space. I think it's something like there should be around 7 words per line. So when they say like you're efficiently using your vertical space, they're also making sure that you're not like moderate, American, hoppy, citrus, done. You know, they still want a certain minimum number of words per line. That's not like a hard and fast, but that is a guide for the graders is, are you writing neatly? Are you writing in, I guess, a normal size of handwriting? Are you printing and not using cursive? So again, these are the completeness and competency, the rubric for that, what that looks like. But really, once this was the part that I was like, okay, I can follow rules. I can make sure that I've done all of these little things that just get you points that take no time at all. And that's also part of why when I talk about, that like the 60 or above, you're all going to get a 60 or above on this tasting exam just by dint of sitting through this now and knowing what the scores are going to be. So for your exam strategy, make it a goal to be completed with your score sheet for your beer in front of you before the next beer is served. This is a challenge. This is why I encourage you to practice writing your score sheets within 15 minutes on the exam. I just took, I think for 5 of my beers, but it was maybe like the third beer. I was still writing my score sheet when the third beer came around. And, so you have, nobody's like taking that beer away from you at the end of 15 minutes. You have 90 minutes to fill out score sheets for 6 beers. You can do that however you like. So with that, I was confident enough that I would be able to finish up that score sheet and move on. But I know people who, when that next beer comes out, they stop with the beer that they've got in front of them. They move it, they come back to it as they have time at the end of the exam. So that's going to be up to you, but I would make it a goal to be completely finished with your score sheet before the next beer comes around. So if you complete a score sheet or the exam before the time is up, make sure each subsection has a score. You get points for that. Make sure the total score is written. Make sure that it's correct. And I do have this on the next slide about what you're allowed to bring in. You can have a 4-function calculator with you to be able to add that up, use it. Even if you're really good at basic arithmetic, use it anyway. Make sure that stylistic accuracy is completed after all of your header info is complete. And generally, for instance, for the last exam that I took, they already had all of that header info filled out for me. Write neatly, so print, don't use cursive, and make sure that your answers are eligible or legible, and that your erasures are complete. So when you come into the exam day, use your best judgment as you're preparing. Follow your normal routine, like brushing your teeth, drinking coffee, eating breakfast. Or if you feel like eschewing that morning routine is going to help you, then do that. Use your best judgment in what works for you. I follow my normal morning routine before I go into a judging exam, really before I go into judging, before I go into a Cicerone exam, because for me, I am very much a creature of habit, and breaking the routine is like really will throw me off track far more than like having toothpaste or drinking coffee will. So I like to follow my normal morning routine. That's up to you. I know other people who feel differently for, equally valid reasons. What you can use during your judging exam for a function calculator, you can have water, mechanical pencils. Do not use a pen. Do not use a wooden pencil. You can have an eraser. Generally, your exam administrator will have those things available for you. I always like to bring my own just in case that, for whatever reason, there's not a 4-function calculator I can use, just in case, I don't know, there's not pencils. What you can't use during the exam, you can't have any reference materials, and you can't use your phone or any kind of electronic device. So after the exam, you should receive a scanned PDF copy of your score sheets. You don't have to do anything with that. That's just for you. You wait forever. The goal for the turnaround on tasting exam results is 3 months to get your results. Results can take upwards of 5+ months, although tasting exam results are usually quicker. I have had exams take up to 6 months for me to get the results back. That's usually for written. Tasting is a little bit faster, but generally tasting is going to be about 3 to 4 months to get your results. That's one of the downsides. You can't register for another upcoming tasting or written exams until you receive your results. So, action items for you. Don't be overwhelmed by everything we just talked about. Just trust the process. This is why we're breaking these up into smaller digestible segments each week. But again, I wanted to make sure you knew from the outset exactly how you're being graded on this exam, because I found it incredibly beneficial once I really understood the process. We will review these slides again before you take a tasting exam. And again, these will be available on the website in a couple of days. So it's there anytime you want to go back and review it. Schedule if you've got an exam coming up near you, sometime like within the next 4 months or so. Contact the administrator now. They fill up quickly. It's also going to provide that accountability and motivation. I know a lot of people who say like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to do this. I've been meaning to do this. Sign up for a tasting exam and then it's done. And then you've got your deadline and you can work toward it, and it helps keep that motivation up. So that is what I have for you all tonight. And I know it looks like I'm a minute over, but I do want to go through the rest of these Q&A really quickly. Okay, so when practicing, should we be looking at more traditional styles of beer versus the more creative contemporary styles that sometimes blur the lines? That is a great question. So I would say, to start, the best thing to do, if you go into your BJCP guidelines, which I know all of you have downloaded on your phone now, and hopefully most of you have as a hard copy, they have a section called commercial examples. These are the beers that best represent what that style is supposed to be. And next week, we'll talk about beer styles a little bit more and kind of what goes into determining what a beer style is. As much as possible, I would start from those commercial examples. So when we're talking about commercial examples, let's say something like American Pale Ale, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That's the iconic American Pale Ale. Go get a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, fill out a score sheet for it. And actually something like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, there may be example score sheets available just on the internet for you to be able to look at. But I would start with those commercial examples as accessible as they are to you. Also keeping in mind, a lot of times, especially if you're going for something like an imported beer, with an imported beer, you're going to get a really good education in off flavors, particularly oxidation and old flavors. So you could call that a silver lining, but just be aware, make sure that you're checking the dates on the beers and getting as fresh as possible. So I would say start with those, but as you're getting more comfortable filling out score sheets, get a contemporary style. Get what the craft brewer near you calls a GOSA, and sit down with the guidelines and your score sheet and the beer and fill it out and decide if you think that's a good example of the style, as per what the guidelines say the style should be. I don't know that I would necessarily share that with the brewery, particularly if you say, I don't think this is a good example. I don't think that they probably would really welcome that. But I would start with the commercial examples and then expand out into more of the craft examples. Let's see. What time of day are the exams usually? They are usually in the morning. They are typically around like 9. So they'll be like maybe 9 to 10:30. 10 to 11:30. They generally take place at breweries before they open. So it's generally going to be in the morning. I've taken one tasting exam that started at like 2 in the afternoon, but generally in the morning time. And then the cost for the tasting exam, thank you, Angelica, you did not miss that. I forgot to say that. The cost for non-BJCP is $40 for the tasting exam. Once you've taken that tasting exam once and you have your BJCP ID, afterwards it will be, I think it's $25. The price goes down once you have a BJCP ID. And it's the same thing for the written exam. So I believe it's $40 for the tasting exam if you don't have a BJCP ID. Once you have a BJCP ID, it's either $20 or $25. But I will verify that. And I will also, that's a great question, because I will put kind of a rubric up on the members area that says what the cost of everything is, so that way people can budget for that. All right, everyone, I ran 5 minutes over. I appreciate all of you hanging in there with me. And, thank you. I'm so excited about doing this. And again, all of the level of excitement and engagement that I've gotten from everyone. I hope that most of you have received the email blasts. I think most of you probably have, because you're here. If you haven't, definitely make sure to check your junk mail and see if it is there. We do have a Discord server. I was very proud of myself for learning how to use Discord and set that up. One of the things I'm also working on, if you haven't already joined the Discord, we have several different channels. We will also have regional channels set up. So if you're wanting to do meetups with people within your region, if you're looking for, good commercial examples within your region, that way you all have each other too as a resource. So please be on the lookout for an email later this week that will give you the information for next week, and also let you know that this recording and the accompanying slides are available on the website. And, as always, if you have questions, reach out to me. Feel free to email me, fill out the form on the website. Anything you all need, I am here to support you. So thank you again. We're doing it, guys. This is our first week, the first step in, getting a whole bunch of beer judges out into the world. And I'm very excited about it. And I hope all of you have a wonderful night.